Good morning. Actually, good afternoon. How about that? Okay, so let's see. We left off, we were talking about the three English constitutions, okay, which is your homework tonight, okay? So, listen, you need to complete the grid on page 20 by reading 20A through E, pages 20A through E. Okay, now on that grid that has a bunch of different rights and then your Magna Carta Petition Right and English Bill of Rights. Not everything will be checked on that. Some of those rights you will not find in any of the documents. Okay? Tomorrow when you come in, I'm going to look at your grid. Each individual. Okay? And I'm going to look at my grid. And I'm going to say your grid looks similar to my grid. And you get 10 points. If your grid doesn't look very good and you marked a couple that were obvious that were not rights found in those documents, well, you might get 9 out of 10.
What if you don't do it?
If you don't do it, you're getting 0 out of 10. And this is not optional. Yeah, come on, man. Because we're going to discuss it tomorrow in class. So I want you to be able to add in on the discussion. Sometimes you're pretty good at that, Hamlin. So if you're up on it, then we'll have a good discussion. And you might get some points for a discussion, too, if it's a good discussion.
Did I miss a discussion?
No, you missed a lecture.
Read on Friday?
Okay?
Well, I missed
So watch the lecture, then read your stuff tonight. Yes?
Do you have an opinion on all the purple people that cheated?
No.
Hey now. Wait.
Are you aware of is there the fact that they knew these were the questions?
I mean, it's pretty obvious.
They knew.
They knew that the questions they were reading were the ones they were going to use, the ones they were practicing?
Wayne was reading them to me this morning.
I heard that they were from the last,
You know why Jackson Nichols got up and took it? He saw them take it out, and then one of the judges walked by and they slid it under the thing, and so then he ran around and grabbed it.
Yeah.
I'd say it's not cheating if all the other teams knew about it. If it was common knowledge that that list existed and all the other communities just didn't take advantage of it, then it's not.
Well, I didn't know about it.
Okay, then looks like it's cheating then.
And I had 3 kids from my house that were on our team. And Christian Barrientos got 2 right today, which I was very proud of Christian. Okay? He's in my house. Okay? All right, no, I don't know the thing, guys. I don't know.
This is a real question.
Let's just let it go. Okay? For the sake of all those that are in that community that had nothing to do with it, let's let it go for those folks. Okay? Yeah.
Where am I reading to answer these? Am I reading? 20A, 20B, 20.
Yeah, over here, Tristan.
Okay. That was.
Maybe if you'd been listening.
Well, no, I just saw A through E, and then I didn't see what.
20A through E. All right. So, guys, So your first paragraph on your essay is going to be about the English founding documents and their impact on our form of government. Okay? So the stuff we talked about on Friday and the stuff we read and discuss tomorrow. Okay? The second paragraph, we're going to be looking at the colonial era in this country and the revolutionary era in this country. Okay? So colonial. Now, I know you guys all remember from studying probably in 8th grade and 11th grade. 3 different types of colonies in the New World. Now, the first colony in the New World, permanent colony, was what? Jamestown, 1607. Where's Jamestown? Hey, Marcus. Virginia. And in 1620, there was another colony. Where? Now there's a rock there. Plymouth. Okay? And this one's where? Where's Plymouth? It's in Massachusetts. So you got one in Virginia and one in Massachusetts.
The Plymouth one's the Puritans.
The Puritans, yeah.
Yeah.
Very religious people that were not Catholic.
A little crazy.
Okay? Some would say puritanical. Okay? Now, all right, so, guys, with Jamestown, you remember? There was a captain. What was that guy's name? Captain John Smith. And you know what Captain John Smith said? He said, if you don't work,
You don't eat.
you don't eat.
And they starved to death.
The ones that didn't work.
What?
The ones that didn't work starved to death.
They ate each other.
Okay. Now, guys, it's going to take a while. But these colonies are going to be successful. They're going to grow. Okay? They developed into 3 different types of colonies. Can you name one of the 3 types of colonies? Anyone?
Theocracy.
How about royal colonies? You remember that?
No.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you do. Royal colonies.
Royalty.
King. The king appoints the officials, the government officials. Okay? Yeah. He gave John Smith the chart. Okay? So, there really ends up being 3 royal colonies. New York, New Jersey, and Virginia. It doesn't hurt. Now, the king appoints the governor. The king appoints the judges. And the king appoints, excuse me, I think I have the hiccups. The upper house white, yeah. Those were the only kind of people here, I guess, except for the natives. Okay. Now, we call this a bicameral legislature. Bicameral. You familiar with bicameral? Cameral? 2 houses, 2 chambers. How? You familiar with that? Bicameral? Now, first hour, nobody knew what bicameral was. So I'm thinking there's got to be some people in here that don't know what bicameral is.
You just told us.
So I'm going to change course for about 7 minutes. Okay? I'm going to do a quick overview of our government. All right? You can put this on the inside of your notebook. You can put this on another page. This is separate. Okay? This is just the basics of our government. Ready, Carpenter?
Ready.
All right. Now, we have 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. The Constitution of the United States has 7 articles in the Constitution. The first 3 are the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Okay? There's another term that we use that's interchangeable with legislature. And what's that? Our legislature is known as what?
Congress.
Congress.
No credit of mine.
Yeah. Our Congress Congress and legislative branch are the same thing. They're interchangeable. Okay? Synonymous. Now, we have a bicameral legislature. We have a House of Representatives and a Senate. Okay? This is U.S. House and U.S. Senate. How many members are there in the United States House of Representatives? 435. Repeat after me. How many members are there in the United States House of Representatives? 435. Hey, it should be like a choir in here. How many members are there in the United States House of Representatives?
435 and 35.
Okay. Over here, guys, is the U.S. flag. Old Glory. Okay?
534 stripes.
There are 50 stars on it, representing 50 states. Each state has how many senators? 2. How many senators do we have? 100. So 435 and 100. Now, when we get to section 4 in here, we'll do an in-depth study of these two chambers and what roles and powers they have. Okay? Their overall job, their most important job, is to make L, legislature, L, laws.
What are L laws?
Laws.
Oh.
Okay? And that's the legislative branch. It's bicameral. 2 chambers. Okay? Now, over here we have the executive branch, where you have the president, the vice president, and the executive departments, otherwise known as the cabinet. We have 15 cabinet departments or executive departments. The last one created was after 9/11, and it's called Homeland Security. Of the 15 cabinet departments, 14 of the 15, the chief of that bureaucracy, remember the chief department's bureaucracy, is called the secretary. Secretary of Education, Treasury, Homeland Security, Veterans Affairs, Defense, State, Interior. Okay? The head of the Department of Justice is not called the Secretary of Justice. It is called the Attorney General. Very good. Okay? So, you got 15 of those departments. Then you have all the other federal agencies like the FBI, the CIA, the IRS, the EPA, the FTC, the FCC, the SEC, the TVA, the AAA, and many, many more. The Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the Coast Guard, all under the President. There are 3 million federal employees, and the vast majority of them work for the boss, the President. Okay? This is the largest employer in the United States, is the executive branch of the federal government. And their job is to carry out or execute the law.
Donald Trump employs the most people.
So, example. Somebody comes up with the idea for a law in the legislature saying we need to put up a sign everywhere a road crosses a railroad to warn people that a train is coming. So Congress passes a law and says there needs to be a sign. Who carries that out? The Department of Transportation will carry that out from the executive branch to carry out that law, to execute that law.
What should happen if the state refuses to allocate the funds granted to it?
Now, number 3 is the judicial branch. Okay? The only court mentioned in the judicial branch in the Constitution is the Supreme Court. There's 1 of them, and there's 9 justices on the Supreme Court. All other federal courts were created by Congress. Okay? Now, the job of the Supreme Court and the federal courts are to interpret the law and the Constitution and the actions of the executive. So, if the Supreme Court felt like that law, putting up railroad signs on intersections, is unconstitutional for some reason, then they would say so. Or, if they felt an action of the president was unconstitutional. For example, when President Andrew Jackson said to this group of Cherokee Indians living in Georgia, "You need to leave, and you need to go west." This became known as what?
Manifest Destiny.
The Trail of Tears. And the Supreme Court said to Andrew Jackson, "You need to stop that. What you're doing is unconstitutional." Andrew Jackson replied to the Supreme Court,
No.
"Come down here and stop me, Supreme Court." See, who has the sword with these three branches? Who gets to carry out the law?
The executive.
The executive has the sword. Who has the purse? The legislative branch controls the purse strings. They're the ones that deal with the money. Okay? Until 1803, they had nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, so if the legislative and the executive wanted to undermine the judicial, they just do nothing about it?
If they want to ignore the judicial branch? Well, it depends. If the legislature ignores the judicial branch, the executive is the one that enforces the law. Okay? So, not much the executive can do except not enforce the laws that the legislature passed. So the legislature can pass laws that are unconstitutional, the executive just won't enforce them. Now, if Jackson wants to ignore the Supreme Court, what can the Congress do to Jackson? Impeach him, which they didn't.
Yeah, if they're fine with that then. So if the judicial branch is declaring something unconstitutional, the president carries it out anyway?
There's nothing the Supreme Court can do. Yeah. 99.9% of the time, both the other branches will abide by what the Supreme Court says. All right, but we're going to get into all of that in the second half of class. But in order to get a full understanding, what we're looking at is the impact of the colonial era on our system of government. So we're looking back at these systems in royal colonies and proprietary and independent colonies. Yeah.
Let's go back to that.
Yeah.
So, like, what's happening now from, like, the legislative is trying to impeach rather than Democrats. So.
Yeah, there's a few, but you've got to have a majority in the House to impeach. In the House, what impeach means is to formally accuse. It doesn't mean you're out. There's a trial in the Senate. You got to have 2/3 of the majority in the Senate to convict in an impeachment trial. Okay, so we've had two presidents that were impeached by the House, Andrew Johnson and William Jefferson Clinton, and neither one was convicted in the Senate. And it's a political trial, it's not a criminal trial. So it's not like somebody's going to jail if they're impeached. It's all political. It's nothing to do with the law. It's just politics.
But could it get, like, overturned by the Supreme Court?
No. The Supreme Court cannot overturn. Now, in the impeachment trial of a president in the Senate, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is the judge in that trial. The 100 senators are the jury. So it's a political trial. A witch hunt, if you will. In some cases, I guess. I think in both cases it was kind of a witch hunt. But, I mean, Bill Clinton did lie under oath, and he did obstruct justice, but not bad enough for the Democrats to vote to convict. Okay, now, what I'm getting to here, guys, is that under these royal colonies, the lower house, which controls the purse, even in a royal colony where the king gets to appoint most of the leaders of that government, even in a royal colony, the lower house is made up of white male property owners, okay? And they control the purse. So who pays the king's governor's salary? The locals, the people that live there. So you think the governor, even though he's appointed by the king, has to listen to the people that live there? Yeah. I mean, they have a say. And this is the most restrictive of the three types, are royal colonies. Now, I will tell you this. When the colonies begin to rebel in the 1760s, okay, the king is going to enforce royal colonyship over other colonies. So later on, we're going to add, during the rebellion, more colonies to this list. New Hampshire, Massachusetts, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia will all become royal colonies with rebellion. So he's going to clamp down on them and appoint a governor. Okay? So that's the first of three types of colonies. The second type is called proprietary. I-4E. Okay. How many guys have taken business law or business principles? Okay. When we think of a proprietor, what is a proprietor? Proprietorship is a business owner, is a proprietor. Okay? So these other colonies, called proprietary colonies, are going to be run like a business, and the king is going to give this colony to an individual, a proprietor, okay, to run the colony like a business, basically, to make money for the crown. Remember mercantilism? Where the colony exists for the mother country, right? To make it rich. Right? That's what these are set up as. Okay? And these proprietary colonies include Maryland, Pennsylvania, Delaware, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. So you get names like Lord Baltimore, William Penn, William Penn, Pennsylvania. Okay? You might remember this name, James Oglethorpe. Okay? Now, guys, Maryland actually had more like indentured servants than Georgia did. Most people think of Georgia as a penal colony. Okay? Maryland was more of a penal colony than Georgia. And you know who they brought over in Maryland? A bunch of Irish. Okay? One of the questions today was who was the first bishop in the New World? It was Carroll, right? What was his name?
John Carroll.
John Carroll. And he had a son, or a grandson, Charles. Charles Carroll which is my grandfather's first and middle name, Charles Carroll Ebright. Okay.
Wait, a bishop had a son? Did you just
Okay, so it was like
let him finish?
it was like somebody in the family.
Oh.
Okay, his brother, I guess, and his son, Charles, anyhow, was the only Catholic signee of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, and it's a pretty good story. When we did Reagan Institute, and I'll bring my notes when we get into the Declaration, talk a little bit about it. But I took a class from Father Eric Weldon, and the class was on Charles Carroll and his family. And it's a great story. They were extremely wealthy. They came over from Ireland. His father, Charles Carroll's father, came over from Ireland and was really rich. And that's kind of how he got a seat at the table, his son. But his son was worthy. I mean, he was very educated, very brilliant, and both educated in the French tradition and the English tradition, which is pretty cool because he gets kind of the Catholic view and the Protestant view, and he really likes this English common law that he learns at Oxford. And so when he comes back to the States, he can be in these circles of men, these thinkers, these philosophers, these legislatures in Virginia, because he's from Virginia. Okay, he'll eventually move to Virginia. Okay, but anyhow, all right. So these are all run by proprietors, like a business. Does that make sense? Now, so the governor is who? The governor is the proprietor. Okay. And who chose the proprietor? The king did, right? All right? But these proprietary colonies are all going to have 3 branches of government. Similar to that. Now the judges, okay, so you got the governor, which is the executive, right? And then your judicial, picked by the king. Okay? And they're going to have a legislature that, again, is run by white, male property owners. Okay? Elected. And they control the purse. Again, similar to the royal colony, but different. Okay, so you see a theme here. All right? Oh, yeah, I got that. Good, we're good there. We're good. All right. The third type of colony we're going to refer to as independent. Independent colonies. And there are 4 of these.
Rhode Island.
Yes. I'll give you Rhode Island. And I'll raise you with New Hampshire.
Pennsylvania isn't one, but
Where's the rebellion start?
Virginia. Yeah.
Boston. Okay? And then Connecticut. So these are all really close together. Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. Now, I would be remiss, guys, if today, what's the date? January 29th, Happy Kansas Day.
It is?
147 years old, I think. Okay.
why didn't we celebrate?
The Wichita Eagle had a little article yesterday. It said, a traffic jam, you know you're in Kansas. When you get in a traffic jam in Kansas, everybody slows down and stops to let the geese cross the street.
That never happens. Yeah.
My car would
Oh, I
probably
have.
use it.
I'd run those by them.
Okay, what's the Kansas motto? Kansas motto? Which means?
I've asked before.
I don't do the stars.
Yeah. Ad aspera.
To the stars, through the Tower of Reeds.
Through difficulties.
To the stars, through difficulties.
I said that like a minute ago.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Jacob. All right. Does anybody know New Hampshire's motto? Because they have the best of the 50 states. Live free or die.
1776.
Live free or die. All right. These independent colonies, guess who they got to elect?
Their governor.
Their governors.
Hey, you better finish that work. Simbi? Simbi. It's better than what I get initially.
Assembly. Assembly.
Simbi?
They call it assembly. Come on, guys.
Simbi. God. So is that the executive then?
They got to elect the governor's the executive.
Oh, wait. What?
These are all chosen by the people.
What's the assembly? About the...
Okay? What do you refer this to as, guys? As self-rule.
No. Who chose the judges? The executive branch?
The people.
Yes.
Guys, self-rule.
That's us.
From 1620, guys. Okay? Now, these people got to make their own decisions. Okay? And since the lower house controls the purse in all of these, who gets to set the taxes?
We do.
We do. Okay? So in all three of the types of colonies, in all 13 colonies, all right? So what we have here, guys, is 150 years or so between 1607 and 1760, roughly. The king is 1,500 miles away, across an ocean. In the 1650s, let's just take, how long would it take for a message to go from New York to London?
2 weeks. 4 months.
It depends.
3 months.
Okay. By the 1750s, 100 years later, how long would it take to get a message across and back?
30,
3 months.
40 days.
About 3 months. Okay, so you're looking at 6 weeks over and 6 weeks back. That's in the 1750s. So before that, guys, it took longer. Okay, and so the king could not micromanage the colonies. The parliament couldn't manage the colonies. They had to manage themselves. All right, when there was a problem that arose, they couldn't wait 3 months or 6 months to have a resolution. They had to deal with it.
So the king knew about gossip before he got 3 months after.
Well, six weeks, and then to get a message back, 6 more weeks. So anytime they did a petition to the king or the parliament,
6 months.
it took a while.
And they'd always get no.
Okay. So this era,
They should have used Amazon Prime.
the era of salutary neglect. Can anybody help with the definition here? Well, you know what neglect means, right? So basically, abandon, leave alone. Okay? Salutary is kind of I don't know, how would you describe that? Anyone?
Allegiance to.
Official, leave alone the colonies.
Yeah. That's what they call it. Okay? 150 years. Okay? Now, let me kind of describe this. Let's say starting January 3rd when you guys came back. I basically said, hey, welcome to my class. You guys can do whatever you want. I'm going to teach and just I'll ignore you if you're throwing carrots and that sort of thing. Okay? Do whatever you want.
That's just your duty.
And then about 2 months into the system, okay, 2 months into the system, I put in a seating chart and I started handing out demerits for not being in your seat when the bell rings, for speaking while I'm speaking, and I start giving detentions too. How are you guys going to respond to that?
Just fine.
Pick up
I'd
arms.
be like, well, hey man, the whole thing was working good.
Okay, maybe I shouldn't have used that as an example. Okay.
I guess we would have had to deal with it. You mean like
You wouldn't have liked it.
How about a better example would be our whole life, like through elementary school we weren't, and then when we got to high school they were like, hey, now you're gonna get married. That would be
Yeah. Yeah, you wouldn't like that. Okay.
So take away our reason. This is
I hated that.
Now, guys, the era of salutary neglect is going to end with the French and Indian War. Now, on the eve of the French and Indian War in 1754, you guys ever heard of this guy?
Ben. Who is that?
Ben Franklin? He is going to propose an idea for the 13 colonies. You know what this idea is, anyone?
Electricity. Albany.
Oh, the Albany Convention. Albany Plan. Yeah. Oh, Union.
Yeah, put them
Yes.
together.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yeah.
I think we do.
Kind of.
Why would we bring the 13 colonies together? For the purposes of what?
Merchant stuff.
Could be economic, but more it's for defense. Defense against whom?
Natives. And the French. And the natives.
Okay? In Europe, they call this war
7 years.
Now, this war is, the label's a little bit of a misnomer. Okay? You have the French with some Native American tribes, and you have the English with some Native American tribes. So it wasn't just the Americans against the French and natives. It was the Americans, the English, and some Indians against the French and some other Indians.
Indians is politically.
Now, I know I'm using that word Indians, and I apologize.
But isn't that pronounced Native American?
Now, I do have a couple of War and Peace veterans in here. And you guys recall studying the 4 wars of empire between the British and the French.
What did you say? Oh.
Like
Yes.
Queen Anne's War,
There was something like that.
and King George's War, and King William's War,
Definitely.
but not King Philip's
Not
War.
King Philip's War.
Because King Philip was an Indian, right?
Yeah.
Metacom.
Not.
Metacon.
Metacom,
Metacom.
who was the son of Chief
Tahiti Taka.
No, he was a.
That sounds
Massasoit.
Yeah. Was he the guy in the Pequot War?
Pequot?
Was that him?
Possibly.
Was that Massasoit? Was he
Yeah, Massasoit was a friend of the white man.
up to his old
Alright,
tricks?
well.
Okay, now, hey,
Hey.
Hey.
Chief.
so I told this story, I think, in War and Peace. My son and daughter went to Central Christian Academy. And my daughter's teacher right now, history teacher, is Miss Turner, and she's a wonderful lady. And she loves history. She's excited about it. And she was in Canada over the summer. And she was up there talking to some people, and she likes history, and she knows about she teaches seven years war. And she goes to this Canadian guy. She says, so what do you guys teach about the French and Indian War? And this guy went off on it. He's like, excuse me, we don't use that word here, Indian, okay? In Canada, they call the 7 Years' War the war. The war. It's like their war. I mean, so for us, when we had World War I, we called it the Great War. The Great War. Well, the French and Indian War is called the war in Canada. Okay? So, no offense to any of you Canadians, all right?
But there's like more than one war. How do they differentiate?
What's that?
How do they differentiate if they call it the war? Which war are they talking about?
I think this is the most important war that they have. That's kind of what they're referring to it as.
Not like
Okay.
World War I.
Right. So, guys, the Albany Plan of Union fails. Okay? The British don't want it. In fact, the colonies don't really want it. So it doesn't happen. But you could say this plan is maybe a little bit of a rough draft of the Constitution. Our first Constitution, the Articles. Okay? A loose confederation of states for defensive purposes. Okay? So just mention that. Now, this war, as I was saying, this French and Indian War, is the fourth in a succession of wars between the British and the French. Okay, those other wars I just mentioned. Those were all world wars for these two countries, the British and the French. They're fighting them in the New World, and they're fighting them in Europe. Okay, so like one of them's called the War of Austrian Succession, and so forth. They have different names for them in Europe. But we use the British terms because, well, that's where we come from. All right, so the British are going to have to bring in 20,000 regular troops to help us fend off the natives and the French. Okay? And this is going to plunge Britain, and it is now Britain, British debt. It's going to plunge them into debt.
How much debt?
A lot of debt.
Quite a bit. Debt? And then they tax us to get that debt to go away.
This is the end of salutary neglect because the British, and think about this from the British perspective, guys. All the blood and sweat and tears and money that they have to spend to come save us from the French and the natives. Is it too much to ask to help pay some taxes to help pay for that debt?
No. The soldiers don't need to be paid. No. They can just stay in our houses and stuff.
Okay. So this leads us to the end of salutary neglect and moves us into the which really begins about 1760. Okay? The Revolutionary Era. Now, we are going to talk about the Revolutionary Era on Wednesday. Okay? And I'm going to have some videos to show you on this. Okay? This is that kind of fun American Revolution, start of the American Revolution story. Okay? And like I said, I'll have some good videos on this that you'll use to kind of pull in ideas for your essay. Okay?
When's our essay?
Next week. Okay?
Do next week, or we're writing it?
We'll be writing it next week. Okay? So, we'll start up that with 1760 with the Stamp Act, but that will start on Wednesday. Tomorrow we're going to discuss the three British constitutions, the Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, and the English Bill of Rights. So come ready to talk about that tomorrow. You got it, St. Brain?